Snow settles softly over a northern forest, quiet enough to hear the breath between moments. A man walks there, spare with words, carrying a small vessel of ashes, a child at his side. There is no war waiting for them, only wind through pine, stone underfoot, and memories heavier than any blade. Tonight, I won't introduce a hero. I'll simply invite you to remain inside a world where gods are not all-powerful and silence has its own gravity. Let the pace slow, let the night widen, and consider this gentle question as you rest. If someone who once shattered worlds seeks a quiet life, will the world allow it? If you enjoy these journeys, please like, share, and subscribe. Tell me where you're listening from, what time it is, and the topics you'd love to explore. Your thoughts may guide our next adventure. This is a Norse world, but it is not told through the songs of the victorious, the sagas you may remember of glorious gods, noble battles, and heroic endings have already passed through too many mouths, too many crowns. What remains here is quieter, heavier. This is a world shaped not by triumph, but by what lingers afterward. In this universe, every divine act leaves a mark. When a god falls, the land remembers, seas retreat or rise, skies dim, cold deepens. Nature does not mourn, and it does not celebrate, it simply reacts. The realms are scarred landscapes, each one carrying the echo of choices made long ago. Nothing disappears cleanly. Consequences sink into stone, into wind, into time itself. This is not a moral world, divided into good and evil. It is a causal one. Actions lead somewhere, always. Here, power is not measured by righteousness, only by impact. The world does not ask whether a choice was justified. It only records what that choice set in motion. In this way, the Norse realms feel old, tired, even as though they have watched the same patterns repeat too many times to be impressed by them anymore. At the center of it all is not a king of gods, nor the promise of apocalypse. It is something far less dramatic and far more persistent. The cycle. Violence gives birth to fear. Fear demands control. Control breeds resistance. Resistance calls for violence again. This cycle does not need a villain to continue. It only needs momentum. Alongside it runs another loop. The cycle between parent and child. What is taught? What is withheld? What is inherited without being chosen? Fathers shape sons. Sons struggle against fathers, and the world watches the pattern replay itself with only the names changed. Even destiny, in this universe, behaves like a habit more than a decree. Prophecies exist, not because the future is fixed, but because the past has been predictable. When beings refuse to change, the future becomes easy to forecast. Fate, here, is simply the echo of unexamined behavior traveling forward through time. And this is where the quiet philosophy of this world begins to surface. God of War does not ask who is strongest. Strength has already failed too many times to be interesting. Instead, it poses a gentler, more unsettling question. Can a being refuse the role assigned to them by history, by blood, by expectation? Can a destroyer choose restraint? Not because he is forced to, but because he understands the cost of not doing so? Can a child step out of a story written before their birth? Can the cycle be interrupted not by greater power, but by deliberate stillness? The world does not answer these questions outright. It does not promise success. It only provides space, harsh, quiet space where such choices might be made. And in that space, between prophecy and consequence, the Norse saga of God of War quietly unfolds. Midgard is not a homeland. It is a pause between journeys, a place where life does not settle so much as endure. Those who live here do not speak of belonging. They speak of getting through the season. The land itself makes this clear. Forests grow dense and uninviting. Mountains rise without ceremony. Rivers cut through ice as if they have learned not to apologize. Nothing in Midgard promises safety. It simply allows existence, moment by moment, if one is attentive enough to remain alive. Nature here is not hostile, but it is indifferent. Snow does not fall to test courage, and storms do not arrive to punish weakness. They come because this is what the land does. To live in Midgard is to learn restraint, to read the sky, to recognize when to move and when to wait. Survival is not heroic. It is quiet, repetitive, and often unseen. Those who endure do so not through strength alone, but through memory, remembering which paths freeze first, which shelters hold, which sounds mean danger, and which mean nothing at all. The people of Midgard do not expect protection. The gods are distant rumors, spoken of carefully, if at all. Fate is not a comforting presence here. It is something to be worked around. Life is guided by experience passed from voice to voice, stories told by firelight, not to inspire, but to warn. Knowledge is practical. Superstition lingers, but it is shaped by fear rather than faith, a sense that larger forces exist, watching from beyond the trees, beyond the mountains, uninterested in human concerns. Architecture reflects this understanding. Homes are low to the ground, built to blend rather than stand out. Wood, stone, and earth are used sparingly, as if to avoid attracting attention. Nothing is meant to last forever. Roofs are repaired, walls are reinforced, then repaired again. Permanence would feel like an invitation to be noticed, and being noticed rarely ends well. Midgard does not celebrate monuments. It values shelters. In this way, the realm mirrors the state of the one who walks through it. Kratos moves through Midgard as someone who breathes but does not belong. He exists here because the land permits it, not because it welcomes him. Like the people who survive within it, he remains alert, contained, aware of how quickly calm can shift. His presence does not disturb the world, but it does not merge with it either. Midgard holds space for those who no longer seek glory. It offers no forgiveness, no absolution, only the possibility of remaining unnoticed long enough to rest. It is a realm where survival replaces destiny, where life is measured not by purpose, but by continuation. And for those who carry heavy histories, that may be enough for now. Helheim does not announce itself as a place of punishment. There are no flames, no judgment, no final reckoning waiting behind its gates. Instead, it receives those who enter with a quiet cold, the kind that settles slowly and refuses to leave. This is not a realm designed to hurt. It is a realm designed to remember. Everything in Helheim feels unfinished. The air carries the weight of thoughts that were never released, words that lingered too long in the chest, decisions postponed until there was no time left to make them. Here, memory is not a reflection of the past. It is the environment itself. Guilt drifts like frost, clinging to surfaces and to the mind alike. Nothing fades quickly. Nothing resolves itself on its own. The cold is more than temperature. It is time slowed almost to stillness. Moments do not pass so much as repeat, looping back on themselves with subtle variations. Footsteps sound familiar. Paths feel deja vu, even when they lead somewhere new. The world seems to whisper that everything important has already happened, and yet refuses to allow anyone to move on. This is the quiet cruelty of Helheim, the sense that the ending has arrived, but departure has been denied. Visibility is limited. Wind cuts through the realm in sharp, restless currents, carrying fragments of voices that may or may not belong to the present. The landscape repeats itself in ways that disorient without confusing, as if the realm wants its visitors to remain aware, not lost. Every turn offers another chance to recognize what has already been seen. There is no escape through distraction here. Helheim removes excess. It narrows focus until only the self remains. Those who walk this realm are not confronted by external tormentors. They are confronted by familiarity. The past steps forward without raising its voice. It does not accuse, it simply stands there, waiting to be acknowledged. Attempts to ignore it lead nowhere. Attempts to rush through only deepen the cold. Progress, if it comes at all, arrives slowly through acceptance rather than force. Helheim reveals one of the quiet laws that governs the 9 realms. No one truly escapes what they carry. The world allows movement, distance, even silence, but it does not erase. The past cannot be outrun. It must be passed through, step by deliberate step, or it becomes a place one never leaves. In this frozen stillness, the realm offers no comfort, but it does offer clarity. Those who endure Helheim learn that memory, when faced, can loosen its grip, and those who refuse will remain, preserved in cold long after the rest of the world has moved on. Jotunheim opens not with grandeur, but with absence. The land stretches wide and quiet, its scale almost overwhelming precisely because so little moves within it. There is no sense of abandonment here, no feeling that life simply wandered away. The stillness is intentional. It is the silence that follows erasure, the kind left behind when a voice has been removed, rather than forgotten. This realm is a grave without markers. The giants did not vanish by accident, and their world was not emptied by time. Jotunheim stands as evidence of a civilization erased so thoroughly that even its absence became part of the landscape. Snow rests on stone that once bore weight. Wind moves through spaces meant for gathering, now open only to the sky. Nothing here asks to be reclaimed. It waits to be understood. The vast murals carved into stone are not expressions of pride. They do not glorify victories or elevate heroes. They exist for a single purpose: to remember what was. These images are records, not art. They hold stories that were never meant to be sung aloud, only preserved against distortion. The giants did not seek control over the future. They sought to ensure that the truth would survive long enough to be found by someone willing to look. In Jotunheim, truth is quiet. It does not demand belief. It offers itself without insistence, knowing that discovery carries more weight than proclamation. The realm trusts time more than power, and memory more than force. Its emptiness is not defeat. It is restraint. Threaded through this silence is Yggdrasil, not as a spectacle, but as a structure. It is not a tree meant to be admired from a distance. It is the unseen framework that allows all realms to exist in relation to one another. Yggdrasil does not govern, judge, or choose. Through it, time flows unevenly. possibilities branch and converge, and use inferable outward, passing between worlds without asking permission. Yggdrasil does not recognize borders, and it does not isolate consequence. A choice made in one realm does not remain contained there. It travels softly, inevitably into others. There is no morality embedded in this system. Yggdrasil does not reward virtue or punish cruelty. It simply maintains the bonds that ensure nothing happens alone. This is its quiet reminder. Existence is shared. Every movement alters the whole. Together, Jotunheim and Yggdrasil reveal the deepest structure of this world. One preserves truth through silence. The other ensures connection through continuity. And between them, the universe makes its quiet declaration: no story is ever truly erased, and no choice is ever truly solitary. The Aesir are not presented as moral figures, nor are they interested in being seen that way. They do not rule through admiration or shared belief. Their authority is quieter, heavier, and far more persistent. It is built from pressure, applied steadily, patiently, until resistance feels unnecessary. Their presence shapes the world long before they arrive. Threats are rarely spoken aloud because they do not need to be. Consequences are already understood. Punishment does not come swiftly or dramatically. It comes selectively, just often enough to remain believable. Information is guided, redirected, or withheld entirely. What people know, what they are allowed to remember, becomes another instrument of control. Truth in this system is not denied, it is managed. The power of the Aesir does not rely on love, loyalty, or reverence. It relies on exhaustion, on the slow erosion of the idea that opposition is worth the cost. When resistance fades, not through defeat, but through inevitability, authority becomes self-sustaining. People comply not because they agree, but because they no longer imagine alternatives. This logic is embedded into the very spaces the Aesir inhabit. Their architecture does not invite awe. It enforces awareness. Structures loom rather than inspire. Halls are designed to be seen from below. Pathways funnel movement in deliberate ways. Nothing is built to feel intimate or welcoming. Every surface, every distance, every barrier carries the same message. You are being observed. Their armies function similarly. They are not symbols of honor or courage. They are reminders. Visibility matters more than engagement. Patrols exist not to fight, but to be noticed. Rituals and ceremonies do not celebrate unity. They reaffirm hierarchy. Participation is expected, not cherished. Absence is remembered. The Aesir understands something fundamental about power. Once it has existed long enough, it no longer needs justification. It does not have to explain itself. It does not have to be fair. It only needs to continue. In this way, the system becomes its own defense. To challenge it feels less like rebellion and more like disruption, an inconvenience to be corrected. They are not villains in the traditional sense. They do not revel openly in cruelty. They simply believe that order, once established, must be preserved at all costs. And if fear proves to be the most efficient tool, then fear becomes tradition. Over time, the line between necessity and habit disappears. Through the Aesir, the world reveals a familiar pattern. Power that begins with purpose eventually sheds it. What remains is structure without meaning, authority without reflection, and those who live beneath it learn to lower their voices, shorten their questions, and accept observation as a permanent condition of existence. The Jotnar do not rule, and they do not conquer. In a world shaped by dominance and reaction, their role is quieter and far more fragile. They exist to remember. While others act, the giants observe. While kingdoms rise and fall, they record the movement rather than interfere with it. For the Jotnar, memory is not nostalgia, it is structure. They preserve events as they unfold, along with the countless paths that once branched away and were never taken. What could have happened matters as much as what did. In their records, choices are not judged, they are contextualized. Every decision leaves a trace, and the accumulation of those traces becomes the true history of the world. They do not see existence as a battlefield. To them, conflict is simply one form of motion among many. Violence is not exceptional, it is predictable. Patterns repeat because beings repeat themselves. The Jotnar watch these repetitions not with detachment, but with a patient understanding of how easily momentum replaces intention. From their perspective, history is not driven by destiny, but by habit. Their refusal to intervene is often mistaken for passivity. In truth, it is restraint. The giants understand that interference alters more than outcomes. It alters perception. To step in too early would collapse possibility into certainty, forcing the world into a single path before it has fully formed. By remaining silent, they allow complexity to survive longer. This silence comes at a cost. To remember without acting is to carry weight without release. The Jotnar bear the knowledge of how many endings were avoidable, how many cycles continued simply because no one paused long enough to question them. Their existence is a form of quiet endurance, one that requires faith not in power, but in awareness. Rather than issuing commands or prophecies as absolutes, they leave markers, fragments, murals, stories etched into stone. These are not instructions, they are invitations. The giants trust that understanding arrives more deeply when it is discovered, not delivered. A truth imposed becomes another form of control. A truth uncovered has the chance to change behavior. In this way, the Jotnar function as the world's displaced conscience. They do not stand at the center of power, but at its edges, where observation is still possible. They wait, knowing that eventually someone will look closely enough, long enough, to recognize the patterns they preserved. When that happens, the giants do not claim credit. They have no need to copy and save. Their work was never about being heard. It was about ensuring that even in a world that forgets itself, memory would remain patient, intact, and quietly alive. Kratos and Atreus do not fit cleanly into the structures that govern this world. They are not fully gods, and they are no longer simply human. Their existence unsettles the systems around them, not through force, but through incompatibility. The world has categories for rulers, subjects, monsters, and witnesses, but it has no stable place for those who refuse to remain in any single role. Wherever they travel, patterns begin to bend. Expectations fail to hold. The Tophases hesitate. This is not because the father and son seek to disrupt order, but because they do not align with it. They move through the realms without accepting the identities offered to them, and in doing so, they become points of interference, small fractures in a structure built on predictability. Kratos carries the weight of a past defined by destruction. Entire worlds remember him as a force of collapse, a being who ended cycles by overwhelming them. Yet in this quieter chapter of his existence, he attempts something far more difficult. He chooses to protect rather than dominate. This choice does not erase what came before. It exists alongside it, creating tension within him and within the world that watches, uncertain which version will prevail. Atreus stands in a different uncertainty. He holds a name and a lineage that carry expectations he has not yet accepted. The world looks at him and sees what he is meant to become, not who he is now. His abilities surface unevenly, guided more by curiosity than command. He has not decided which shape to take, only that the shapes offered feel incomplete. Together they form an unstable balance. Kratos leans toward restraint, guarding against repetition. Atreus leans toward possibility, testing boundaries that have long gone unquestioned. One knows the cost of unexamined power. The other wonders if power can exist without repeating the same harm. Their journey is not about resolution, but about coexistence between past and future, certainty and change. In the wider structure of the world, they function as a question rather than an answer. If systems are built on roles, and roles are built on repetition, what happens when someone steps outside them? Can a new pattern emerge? Not through conquest, but through refusal. Kratos and Atreus do not promise a new order. They do not announce an alternative. They simply continue, making choices that do not align neatly with prophecy or tradition, and in doing so, they suggest a quiet possibility that belonging may not be found within existing structures, but created carefully, imperfectly, through deliberate change. Prophecy in this world does not arrive as a command. It does not speak with urgency or demand obedience. It simply exists, quiet, patient, like a chart drawn by those who have watched the same patterns repeat for far too long. A prophecy is not a verdict. It is a map of likelihoods, sketched from familiarity with how the world tends to behave when left unchanged. Each prophecy is born from observation rather than inspiration, that gathers its shape from previous cycles, from the habits of gods who mistake control for stability, from the recurring ways fear hardens into policy and power resists release. Nothing mystical is required. When the same conditions arise, the same outcomes become easy to predict. Prophecy here is less about seeing the future and more about recognizing repetition. This is why it feels accurate. Not because it is sacred, but because the world rarely surprises itself. Those who hold power repeat the strategies that once worked. Those who suffer learn to expect the same outcomes. Over time, behavior becomes tradition, and tradition becomes destiny. The prophecy simply connects the dots that everyone else refuses to look at for too long. In this sense, prophecy is passive. It does not push events forward. It waits. It observes choices as they are made, noting how often they mirror what has come before. The future does not rush to meet the prophecy. The prophecy patiently allows the future to walk into it. The danger begins when belief replaces awareness. When beings treat prophecy as unavoidable, they stop questioning their own movement. Decisions feel justified because they appear foretold. Responsibility dissolves into inevitability. In attempting to avoid the future they fear, they often accelerate toward it, guided by the very assumptions the prophecy was built upon. The world does not punish this belief. It simply accommodates it. When everyone agrees the path is fixed, fewer will attempt to step aside. And so the prophecy becomes accurate, not because it was correct from the beginning, but because it was trusted too completely. What prophecy truly reveals is not the shape of what must come, but the limits of imagination. It shows how narrow the range of choices has become when fear dictates action and power refuses reflection. The more rigid the system, the clearer the prophecy appears. Yet, within this design lies a quiet opening. Because prophecy does not force, it can be ignored. Because it only maps possibility, it can be altered by choice. The moment a being acts outside expectation, without denial, without defiance, but with awareness, the map loses precision. Lines blur, outcomes hesitate. Prophecy endures not because it is absolute, but because change is rare. And when change does arrive, it does not announce itself. It simply steps off the path that was always assumed, leaving the prophecy behind, unfinished. The cycle does not exist because the world desires repetition. It exists because repetition is efficient. In a universe shaped by power and fear, the cycle becomes a method of self-preservation, a way for reality to remain familiar even as names and faces change. It begins quietly. A god is born into promise, into belief, into the idea that power can be used differently this time. Order is established, often with sincere intent. Protection is offered. Stability is praised. For a moment, the world appears balanced. But balance, once achieved, brings a new anxiety, the fear of losing it. That fear reshapes everything. Control replaces care. Surveillance replaces trust. The structures meant to protect become tools to enforce obedience. Violence is reintroduced, not as chaos, but as maintenance. Memory becomes dangerous. History is edited, simplified, or erased, not out of malice, but to prevent unrest. The world is told that this is necessary, that without it, everything will collapse. Eventually, the weight becomes too heavy. Those beneath the system push back. Another god rises. Another promise is made. Another ending is declared. The throne changes hands. The cycle resets. Each generation believes itself to be different. Each believes it has learned from the failures of the past. And yet, when pressure returns, the same instruments are reached first. Strength, force, silence, control. These tools are familiar, readily available, and immediately effective. They feel like solutions because they have worked before, even if only temporarily. The cycle has no intent of its own. It does not demand continuation. It simply persists because stopping requires something rarer than power. It requires hesitation, reflection, the willingness to accept uncertainty without reaching for dominance to soothe it. Few are prepared to do this, especially those who hold the most influence. Those at the top often sustain the cycle the longest, not because they are inherently cruel, but because they feel trapped by responsibility. They believe that if they let go, everything will unravel, that without their control, chaos will return, and so they continue, convincing themselves that there is no alternative, that restraint would be negligence. Over time, the cycle becomes invisible. It is no longer recognized as a pattern, only as reality. People stop asking how things began and focus solely on how to survive them. The idea of ending the cycle feels abstract, unrealistic, even dangerous, and yet the cycle is fragile. It depends entirely on participation. It continues only because each new holder of power chooses familiarity over uncertainty. The moment someone refuses, truly refuses, to respond with the same tools, the mechanism begins to falter. The world does not collapse when the cycle is questioned. It only becomes quiet, unsteady, open, and in that space, something unfamiliar appears, the possibility that stability does not have to be enforced, and that power does not have to repeat itself to exist. Ragnarok is often spoken of as an ending written into the bones of the world, a final storm, an unavoidable collapse. But within this universe, it is something far more revealing. Ragnarok is not a command that must be obeyed. It is the point where every delayed choice arrives at once, asking to be acknowledged. For generations, decisions have been postponed rather than resolved, conflicts contained rather than healed, terror maintained rather than questioned. Each compromise, each act of control justified as temporary, gathers weight over time. Ragnarok forms where these accumulated deferrals converge. It is not born from fate, but from avoidance. As the world moves closer to this moment, familiar explanations begin to lose their strength. Arguments that once felt reasonable sound hollow. Traditions that claimed necessity reveal their true purpose. In the narrowing space before Ragnarok, there is no room left for abstraction. Every action becomes clear in its intent. Fear can no longer disguise itself as duty. Control can no longer hide behind protection. This is why Ragnarok functions as a test rather than a catastrophe. It asks only one question, but it asks it of everyone at once. Who will continue the cycle because it feels safer than change? And who will accept the cost of stepping away, even without knowing what will replace it? The world does not demand heroism in this moment. It does not require victory. It requires restraint. To stop striking when striking would be easier. To choose uncertainty over repetition, to allow structures to loosen without rushing to replace them with familiar shapes. Those who cling to power often believe they are preventing Ragnarok by holding tighter. In truth, they are ensuring its arrival. Each act of domination, each refusal to release control, adds momentum. Ragnarok advances not through rebellion, but through insistence, the insistence that nothing must change. And yet the collapse is not inevitable. The world does not break because Ragnarok occurs. It breaks when no one is willing to pause, when fear overrides reflection, when every choice is made in reaction rather than awareness. If even one being chooses differently, the shape of Ragnarok alters. It may still arrive, but it arrives transformed, less as an ending, more as a turning point. The test is not whether the world can survive destruction. It is whether it can survive restraint. In this way, Ragnarok reveals the final truth of the cycle. The end is not brought by prophecy or force. It is brought or prevented by choice, and the world waits quietly to see who will make it. Take a slow breath in, as if the air itself has weight. Let it feel cold and clean, like snow settling on your shoulders without urgency. Imagine the stillness of a northern forest at night, where sound is softened by frost, and the ground holds every footstep gently. In that quiet, picture a worn axe resting in steady hands, not raised, not ready, simply present. Feel the breath of a father who has learned to survive by staying silent, whose care is carried more in action than in words. Let that heaviness exist without trying to change it. Hold the breath for a moment, not tightly, just long enough to notice the space it creates. In that pause, recognize that this world does not ask you to prove anything. There is no challenge waiting, no trial demanding strength. The path before you is not measured by how hard you can strike, but by how deliberately you can choose. Strength has already been spent many times here. What remains is awareness. Stay with that stillness. Notice how the world feels when nothing is demanded of you. Snow does not expect you to move faster. The night does not require explanation. Even the silence is not judging. It is simply present, allowing you to be present as well. In this moment, you are not defined by what you have done or by what you might still need to do. You are defined only by the fact that you are here breathing. Now, let the breath move outward. Release it slowly, as if you are setting something down after carrying it for too long. With the exhale, allow roles to soften. The names you answer to can fade for a while. Expectations loosen their grip. The past does not need to be resolved right now. It can rest beside you, quiet, without pressing for attention. As the air leaves, imagine your shoulders lowering, just slightly, not because you are safe, but because you no longer need to remain ready. The world does not require a guard in this moment. It does not need a defender or a witness. It only allows presence. Breathe again gently, in and out. Let the rhythm slow on its own. There is no rush, no direction you must face. Here you are permitted to exist without struggle, without justification. The snow will continue to fall whether you watch it or not. The forest will remain patient and unmoved. Stay with that feeling as you rest. Being here is enough. No battle needs to be won. No story needs to be completed. For now, simply remain quiet, grounded, and at ease within the stillness of the world. thought of war no longer lingers on the moment of victory. It stays with what follows, the weight that remains when the clash is over, and there is no enemy left to blame. It becomes a quiet reflection on responsibility, on learning how to continue when destruction is no longer an option, and when living demands more courage than fighting ever did. I won't close the gates of the 9 realms tonight. I'll simply leave them resting slightly ajar, somewhere in your memory, where they can remain without asking anything of you. Sleep well, in a world where even the gods must learn how to become human.